now it's time for another Board Game Brawl Top 10 with Nick Meaningham, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey peeps, it is time for another one of my top 10 lists. This time it is my top 10 Eurogames, which might be very interesting if you're familiar with my channel because you know they are not my preferred type of game, despite how ubiquitous they are to the modern hardcore gaming world. If you're not familiar with Eurogames, you can actually watch a video that I did a long time ago for part of my series Board Game Basics, my now defunct series, where I explain a little bit about what Eurogames are as opposed to other genres like Ameritrash games. But Eurogames are basically games that put a heavy emphasis on strategy, a heavy emphasis on resource management, action efficiency, not a lot of direct conflict, if at all, and a lot of times not very much theme either. Now, if you want to know a bit more about how I came about doing this list, the sort of modus operandi I used, if I pronounced that correctly, and all these different things, then you can continue to watch right now. However, a lot of people don't like my long intros. I understand that. There will be a timestamp at the bottom of your screen, which you can click on, which will take you directly to my number 10 and bypass all this nonsense. It may not work on mobile phones, so in that case, I'll actually spell out the actual time that you can manually fast forward to. Okay? Great. So, for those of you that are still here, I found this to be a very difficult list to do. For starters, as I've already mentioned, Eurogames are not typically my thing. There's definitely a lot that I like, but for the most part, I focus on other more thematic experiences. That's very well represented in my top 100 list and a lot of my other top 10 lists that I do throughout the year. However, because there are a decent chunk of Eurogames that I really, really enjoy, I wanted to spotlight them because they're not liable to show up on a lot of my other lists. But actually, part of the problem putting together this list was the fact that so many Eurogames now, or at least a lot of the ones that I like, not really traditional Eurogames. They're more like hybrid games. And in fact, I put a poll together, put it on Board Game Geek just in the general section to sort of get a lot of feedback, and I did get a lot of feedback for some of the games that were potentially eligible for this list, but I wasn't sure. Were they not Eurogame enough? Were they hybrids? Were they something else altogether? And I liked the feedback that I got, and I used it to sort of guide and influence my list quite a bit. And what I ended up discovering was that there was quite a few games that weren't neatly Eurogames or Ameritrash, that I guess you would call hybrids for lack of a better term, and you'll be seeing a separate list for that in the very, hopefully, near future. But for now, I've picked games I was pretty confident people would classify as Eurogames. One thing, though, you'll notice is that they are newer games. You're not going to see any classic Eurogames here, and that's for a reason. Not just because I haven't played many of them, but because I have zero interest in playing a lot of those games. Okay, for instance, I'll just spoil this. There's no Puerto Rico on my list. A lot of people would say that is like the quintessential Euro game, or at least one of a few quintessential Euro games. Nowhere near my list. I have no interest in ever playing that game. The theme, the mechanisms that I've seen look so dry that I don't have an interest. And I'm not picking on Puerto Rico. I'm just, because I'm sure it's an incredibly well-designed game, but it's not my kind of game. A lot of times I use the phrase when I give a good review to a Euro game that it's my kind of Euro, and that's what these games are. They're newer. A lot of them are a lot more thematic than other games. A lot of them look a lot better as far as artwork and presentation, and a lot of them just have really clever mechanisms. That's what I'm looking for, and that's what my list focused on. So just know that this is going to be a very bizarre list compared to a lot of other top 10 Euro games lists, but I'm a very bizarre reviewer, so go ahead and take that for what it's worth. So, without further ado, because even for people that wanted to watch this has probably gone on too long, let's get to the top 10. My number 10 is a game that I don't feel gets enough love because people never talk about it. It's called Firenze, and it's from Pegasus Spiel. I'm not even sure it's ever been properly released over here in North America. Firenze is all about building towers, of course, in Florence back in the Renaissance era, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And how you're doing that is by actually taking these really nice wooden tiles from a bag and using them. They get put out on these cards, and then you take these cards and then use them to build up your own personal set of towers that you have in front of you. But there's a few interesting things going on above and beyond that, as interesting as that is on itself. First off, you're sort of building these towers and chasing these victory point markers, which gives the game a sense of urgency. But it uses what I call the small world mechanism, which is that you can take you might want to take a certain card further down the line because it has a lot of tiles on it, but some of those cards are actually bad for you, or at least not that good. And in order to take it, you have to bypass other things, and you have to actually take a tiles from your set that you already have and put them on every card that you bypass. So that's a very interesting thing to me. So what are you willing to sacrifice in order to get the color of tiles that you need right then and there? Also, you can't abandon a tower while you're constructing it, or else you have to wipe it out and start from scratch with another tower. It's a very sort of tough and tight game, even though it's relatively simple, and I'd even say it's moderate weight, because it can be brutal and it can be in your face. There's actually a little more interaction than most Euros have in this game, as far as taking stuff to keep other players from getting them, and just some nasty events and things like that. Because of that, it can be kind of a brutal game, but from components to artwork to just the theme, what there is of it, and just some of those clever mechanisms, I really enjoy it, and I hope more people get to play it eventually. That is Firenze from Pegasus Spiel, my number 10. My number 9 just came out last year, and that is the Voyages of Marco Polo from Z-Man Games. As the name implies, you take control of one of the many famous explorers from a certain time period, like Marco Polo or his family members and things like that. But you are taking these explorers and you are trying to go along these different trade routes. You're trying to get different resources like spices and camels and use them to make the best routes possible, get to certain routes before other players do and get more victory points, get control of these different action tiles to give you special abilities, things like that. But one of the most notable things about the game are the special player powers, which are... everyone I've heard describes them the same way. They're incredibly over-the-top powerful for this type of game, but everyone's in the same boat because everyone's got a really super power, essentially. You get extra money whenever you go to the market, every time that you sell, or you get an extra die. This is a dice placement game, too, which is another very notable aspect of the game. It's a sort of worker placement game with dice, which there's not too many of, and some of them I don't like Alien Frontiers. But this is one that I do like quite a bit. There's just a lot of different things that really work for me. How the worker placement with the dice is done, and how you have to put different combinations of dice and different numbers out onto the board. How you try to make the most efficient routes possible to get to your goals, but people can go in different routes and have different strategies in mind. All the components are nice, the resources, the artwork in the game, and the character powers, which, can be unbalanced, but that's kind of the point, I guess. So I really enjoyed this one, and definitely one of the Euro games from last year that really surprised me. That is the Voyages of Marco Polo from Z-Man Games, my number 9. Also from last year, my number 8 is Shakespeare from Istari Games. Now, this was a game that is actually more thematic than a lot of the games on this list. You are actually part of Shakespeare's company, or one of the theaters that Shakespeare writes for, and writes plays for, and you're trying to put on a show. And when I say put on a show, you have to have the right actors, you have to have the costumes, you have to have the set dressings. This is supposed to simulate you actually putting on a show and everything that entails. Now, of course, this is a Euro game, so a lot of that is abstracted to a degree, but it is to this game's credit that while you may not be fully immersed in the theme at all times, the game is beautiful. It's got artwork that's fantastic, and you actually are doing some spatial things there, like actually putting little tokens out representing the different set dressing. You're getting the different costume tokens, putting them on certain actors, getting all these different bonuses. You actually have to keep track of different tracks that are for the writing of the play and how well it's directed and all of these different things. And when you break it down to its constituent parts of Eurogameness, you have to get as forward on these tracks as possible in order to get the most bonuses. You have to carefully manage your money. You have to pay your actors lest they come back and penalize you later. It's an incredibly tight game. Very, very competitive. And every game of this that I've played has always come down to just a few points, even between the first and last person. That's how tight these games are. But I actually like that. I like that everyone feels like they're in it right to the end. And it's hard to tell whether you're completely eliminated or not. But after the game is done, you can look back and say, that's where I screwed up. If I had just done this and this better, I would have probably won. But even the person who won is probably like, I wish I had done this better. So it's that kind of game, very tight, very restrictive in some regards, but very, very fun and more thematic than you would suspect and very beautiful to look at. That is Shakespeare from Istari Games, my number 8 Euro game. My number 7 Euro game is probably one of the lightest games on this list, if not the lightest, and that is Takenoko from Bombix and Asmodee. First off, it's a beautiful game. I happen to have the collector's edition, but even if you just have the normal edition, any of the printings of it, it's a gorgeous game. Gorgeous artwork, these little bamboo pieces. You are taking control of, you and the other players are collectively taking control of a gardener and a panda in a bamboo garden. You're trying to get the panda to eat the right kind of bamboo to meet your objectives. You're trying to get the gardener to move to the right tiles and to grow the right bamboo to meet other objectives. You want to put down the right tiles to meet other objectives. It's all about getting these objective cards and doing it in the best way possible, the most efficient way possible, to get as many of them as completed before your other players do. Very simple, very straightforward. There is just some luck of the draw involved, but because of the beauty of the game, because it is a great gateway game, in my opinion, for a lot of people, while still having those classic Euro game elements of action efficiency, resource management, not too much conflict with the other players, only insofar as like, oh, why did you move them there? It ruins all my plans, that kind of thing. Because of that, I just find that it works very, very well, and it's one of my favorite games to this point. Even though I play a lot heavier and more complicated games, Takenoko still sticks around. So that is Takenoko, my number 7 Euro game. My number 6 is also a fairly light game and somewhat questionable for this list, but I'm going to go ahead and put it here instead of the hybrid list anyways. That is Abyss, also from Bombix, actually, and Asmodee. Abyss is a very beautiful game. That's what it's most known for, I think, as far as like its cover art and all the artwork on the cards. But even aside from that, there's a solid game here about taking different cards, a set collection to a degree, but also using those sets to get powerful Lord cards in this underwater kingdom, this very light theme, which is a Eurogame element for sure, but trying to get these different Lords and use their special abilities to the best of your ability. Each of the different tribes of merfolk give you different special abilities. Some of them are more combative than others. Some of them are more about just getting effects that are more long-term planning and strategy. Some are just straight-up victory points. But getting these merfolk and using the keys that they give to get other lands that maximize your points, that give you more points. There's a lot of classic Euro set collection elements here, together with just trying to build a strategy over time, but done in a compressed time frame and in a very simple way that, again, this would be a great gateway game as well. So that is Abyss from Bombix and Asmodee, my number 6. My number 5 is Elysium from Space Cowboys, and this is a game that that also came out just last year, earlier in the year, very early in the year, but I remember clearly the first time that I played it, the very first game group that I had it out at, first game that we played that night, and I said, we gotta play again, like right now. I don't care if you guys are leaving or going, or if other people want to come in, I'm playing this again because this game blew my mind, and very few games give me that reaction, but this was one of them. There's a lot of great things about this game. I mean, the artwork is great, and there's some classic set collection elements here where you're trying to consolidate the power of these ancient Greek gods. But there's also so much other things going on for a relatively simple and straightforward game. You have these different colored totems that will dictate what color of cards you're or what you're still allowed to take, and you're vying and bidding for these different elements, and bidding and in sort of using that. And oh man, I'm kind of tripping over myself because I just love talking about this game. But I love the fact that all the different god cards that you choose to use, you can actually pre-construct what cards you're going to use before each game. Have so many different abilities and different ways in which they interact. Like the Hades cards are perfect for what you want to do is get your cards down to Elysium, and that's what he's perfect for, whereas Zeus is just like straight up points. Get as many points as possible. Other cards give you other bonuses depending on how you use them. There's just a lot going on in the game, but it's got beautiful artwork, tons of different variety to how you set up the game. Some of the gods that you may choose to use give completely different aspects, like the Oracle board, stuff like that, or Ares, who has just a whole other way to win the game with a different type of victory point condition. Just a fantastic game with great component value. That is Elysium from Space Cowboys, my number 5. My number 4 is Five Tribes from Days of Wonder. Now, I like a lot of Days of Wonder's games, but I haven't always liked every Euro-style game they've put out. But Five Tribes really impressed me. Now, one of the complaints about the game is that it is very long to play, and there's not a lot going on between turns because you're sort of, the game is sort of a Mancala mechanism where you have all these meeples out on the tile, and what you do on your turn can completely screw up what the other players want to do, so there's not a lot of point looking at the board beforehand, but it's all about having a strategy and sticking to it, and when your turn comes back around again, try to make that work as best as possible with what's still out on the board. As the game goes on, your options start to decrease, where you're trying to activate the abilities of these meeples that are all of different colors, the tribes of the game, but you just have to make the best move possible. There is a lot of conflict between the players because you can directly influence what you know they're going for, like things like the assassin meeples powers, to kill off powers that you know the other players want to take advantage of. And it's very interesting, the spatial element of the game and how the Mancala type mechanism works. It looks great, as all Days of Wonders games tend to do. There's an expansion for it that's also wonderful, which means I've played it quite a bit more than some of the other games on this list because I got the opportunity to try out something new for it. But expansion or not, great game from Days of Wonder, who is known for making great games, as a matter of fact. And I liked this a lot more than I thought I would, given how much of a pretty heavy Euro it really is. That is Five Tribes from Days of Wonder, my number 4. My number 3 was perhaps more questionable for this list than a lot of the other ones, only because it's hard to imagine a Euro game with as many dice as this one has. Euro games not typically being known for buckets of dice, but in this case it makes sense because the game is Roll for the Galaxy from Rio Grande Games, and what you're doing with those dice is actually sort of a worker placement type thing, and definitely a lot of resource management and action efficiency and programming. This is the spiritual successor to Race for the Galaxy, a game I did not like at all, surprisingly, since that's more of a card game. But this one, I think, was much more accessible to me, everything perhaps because of the dice element and because of the actual element, the spatial element of putting them out onto the different the planets and developments that you have control over. It just made more sense to me thematically, and I connected more with it. And this is a solid game that has been a hit with every group I played it with every person I played it with, where you have these different colored dice. You start off with different developments and home planets, and that kind of influences what your starting strategy is. You are programming actions, you're putting dice behind your screen, locking them into certain places to do certain things like exploring, like shipping, like trading, or producing and consuming those goods, and trying to get the most points possible. But there's just different ways to go about it, and there's that tension of like, okay, I've selected this action, so I know that this one's going to happen, but I really hope these other ones happen, but I can only lock in one, so I'm hoping the other people, I'm going to look out on the board and see what they're trying to do, and I hope that they have the same wavelength that I have, and that they're going to also ship so that I can ship without having to select it myself. So that sort of tension and just not knowing what's going to happen, together with the sort of tight resource management and economy of the game, really struck a chord with me, and I really, really enjoyed it, as well as the great components and artwork that it has. That is Roll for the Galaxy from Rio Grande Games, my number 3 Euro game. My number 2 is Orléans, and just like Elysium, some of the other games on my list, I sort of had to warm up to them a little bit. Like after the first game, I was like, let me try that again. Oh, okay, yeah, now I'm into it. But just like with Elysium, Orléans was the game where the first time I played it, I'm like, this is great. And part of the reason for that is that Orléans is a bag building game, very similar to a deck building game, which is possibly my favorite genre or favorite game mechanism, if you just want to specify it even more. But in this case, you are literally throwing tokens into a bag and then mixing them up and drawing them out. But you're building it over time the same way you would with the traditional deck building game. You're buying these different workers, these different townsfolk, like fishermen and priests and monks and different types of laborers that can be activated on different spots out on a board. You can even buy other smaller improvement boards to give you more special abilities that the other players don't have, but you all activate them in the same way by putting out these different workers, hoping you draw them when you need them, and activating them in the best, most efficient way possible. There's lots of stuff going on in the game even besides that. You have another separate board where you're trying to move your different meeples around in order to get goods, which you can then are going to be points for you. There's there's these different tracks that you go on that you want to be escalate on the track as much as possible in order to get the most money as well. You can send your workers out to basically go on what do they call it, to go on, not sabbatical, it's the word, whatever, you're sending them off to like a missionary work, and you can get points that way as well. And if you can fill in these different spaces, there's just a ton of stuff going on. The collector's edition, or the nice deluxe edition from Tasty Minstrel, is even better because it's got really, really nice wooden components. But regardless of how you choose to play the game, this is just a wonderful, wonderful game. It's very engaging, even though the theme may be very, very light and pasted on. I never thought about it. I was so engaged with the game, no matter how long it was. Every turn I felt, even on other players' turns, I felt constantly engaged, wondering what I'm going to do next, what my strategy was going to be. Couldn't wait to do my next action. That's how much I love this game. That is Orléans' latest version from Tasty Minstrel Games, my number 2. And finally, my number 1 Euro game is Imperial Settlers from Portal Games. Imperial Settlers really took me by surprise, because I thought it would be an interesting card game, and I kind of bought it on a whim because everyone was talking about it. And while I liked some other Portal games, I wasn't a fan, actually, of the source material for this game, which was the original edition of 51st State and the New Era. In fact, I'd played those very early on in my modern board gaming life and was completely turned off by them, by what I felt were very dense rules, and by the appearance of the game. So I was kind of hesitant about Imperial Settlers, especially when I found that out. Actually playing the game, though, felt so intuitive, so much fun. Loved the artwork and graphic design aside from the tiny text. Just everything that I thought those original base games that this was based on did wrong, in my opinion, this one did right, and I just got into it way, way more. You have these different factions representing great civilizations throughout time, of course, in a lot more abstracted way, with some cutesy artwork, just to sort of not keep it too serious, keep it more of a lighthearted game, but I really appreciate that about it as well. It's all about getting these different production cards out into play to get your resources going with very nice wooden components, and then using those to build up better features of your civilization. You've got basic cards that everyone's going to be vying for just to get that production going, but then your faction will dictate your different play style and the other specialized buildings that you have. If you're the Egyptians, you might be just getting a lot of gold, which gives you a lot of flexibility as to how you can use them for different resources. Whereas if you're the barbarians, or I think even the Romans to a degree, you're much more combat oriented. There's a lot of interaction in this game that a lot of other Euro games don't have, as far as destroying other players' buildings, which doesn't penalize you that much because you always have to sacrifice buildings to build bigger and better stuff anyway. So that's another interesting aspect of the game. Some factions are easier to use than others. There's a really cool expansion called the Atlanteans expansion that has a crazy compared to the other factions, but also very, very interesting as well. So they're obviously willing to take this game in more fantastical directions, especially as far as the theme, and I really appreciate that too. So this is another game that's been a big hit with everyone I've played it with. Even people who would think like, oh, this is probably a little bit too heavy. Not really heavy, but a little bit too heavy for these people. But I've tried it anyways, and everyone's loved it because there's something about using a card for multiple things, which this game has in spades, no pun intended or anything, and also using a card and deciding which one's best to play at a certain time, building up to something, seeing your little civilization grow, even if it's in an abstract way, seeing it grow out like that is just fun for everyone involved. So Imperial Settlers was an easy choice for me for my number 1 Euro game. Still love it to this day, and I can't wait to play it more. Can't wait to see what it has in store for its future. So that is Imperial Settlers from Portal Games, my number 1. And that's the list. Now, of course, there might be some dissenting opinions on what constitutes a Euro game and what games were left off. If some of your favorite games that you know that I like as well weren't on this list and you're freaking out about it, know that I might consider it a hybrid game and it may end up on a completely different list, including one very notorious omission from this list that I'm sure people are exclaiming about and spitting their cereal all over their screen. At least that's what I imagine you do every time you guys watch my videos. But thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for enduring this list for me if you liked it or didn't like it, and look forward to the next list. That was my top 10 Euro games. Thanks for watching. Take care.